Good afternoon, everyone. I am Megan Rogers with Indiana SHIP. I am the volunteer supervisor for Northwest region of Indiana, and I am here with a very special guest who I'll introduce in just a couple minutes. We have our Lunch and Learn for August, and with our Lunch and Learns, we kind of do a series of three like-kinded videos or guest speakers. And the series that we have now is community resources. So last month we talked to some navigators and community health workers. Next month we have some staff from Indiana Department of Insurance on those programs. And today we are joined by Kit. Kit, I lost my note with your last name. Kit Paternoster. Is that close?
That's great.
Okay, thank you. Um, so Kit is with the Indiana Legal Services, and she is a long-term state ombudsman, and she's going to tell us what ombudsman means, what they do, what they can't do, where they go, and how to get a hold of an ombudsman if you need one. So as Kit is educating us on this topic, feel free to ask your questions in the chat box. And if you are watching this as the recording later on Facebook, feel free to chat in your questions then as well. Susan and I monitor those chat box for questions. Kit, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate your assistance, Megan, and I want to thank Susan for asking me to be here. I do quite a bit of public speaking on various topics, so I'm happy to be here. Um, for those of you who may not be familiar with the Ombudsman or the Ombudsman program, I'm just going to give some basics. Ombudsman, as I understand it, is a Swedish word that means advocate. And that's exactly what we are. The Ombudsman program was birthed under the Federal Older Americans Act, and every state is required to have an ombudsman program. And I am not the state ombudsman. Each state has an individual who is the head ombudsman. That is the state ombudsman, and they typically have a deputy, as we do here in Indiana. When this program was mandated, one of the things that did not happen is no money was appropriated to pay states for this program. So that presents some challenges at times. And just as a footnote, I'm a former ship counselor myself. So I know the audience to which I'm speaking. And I did that for several years. And I've been an ombudsman now for about 4.5 years. And I will say that when you are a new ombudsman, you're considered new for the first 3 years because the role is so complex and demanding. And we get new things thrown at us all the time. We go into facilities that are licensed, meaning we go into licensed long-term care, otherwise known as nursing homes, and we also go into licensed assisted living facilities. Some of the rules that apply for those different facilities, well, they're different. The rules are different. If you're in a nursing home, you need skilled care. If you're in assisted living, you typically could qualify for skilled care, but you opt to live in an assisted living facility under the Medicaid waiver program typically. And some people pay out of pocket for nursing home and or assisted living. That's more the exception than the rule. It's very expensive to live in either kind of facility. Uh, we are resident directed, meaning that we work for the resident as our client. So, for example, if a family member, a friend, a staff member, an interested party has a concern about what's going on with a resident in a facility, they can file a complaint with us. And when that happens, we typically will either call the resident involved or go out and visit the resident. And to give you an example, if, let's say, a young man calls us and says, I'm concerned about the care my grandmother's getting in her nursing home. And I'll ask a little bit more about it. Then I'll go meet with the resident. And if this resident, assuming the resident is alert oriented and does not have very advanced dementia and can carry on a conversation, we find out, what does the resident want? Does the resident have a concern or a complaint? So if this grandson calls and has complaints, we go see the resident. When we see the resident and the resident says, I love it here, I'm fine, I've made friends, I get good care, the food could be better, but that's always the case. And she would say, I don't have any concerns. I don't want you to do anything. Well, guess what we do? Nothing. We take our direction from the resident, not the caller. If someone is, say, in memory care, that could be a little different. We are often contacted by someone in the family or not in the family who is the power of attorney and has a concern. Sometimes we deal with guardians. Guardians have more say in what happens with a resident, and they can be the responsible person. If a person is a power of attorney and they call us, we do the same thing. We go meet with the resident. If the resident does not have any concerns and does not want us to do anything, we don't do anything. Our allegiance is to the resident, not to the power of attorney. And I learned this a couple of years ago, that in many instances, a power of attorney person can trump a guardian. If someone has a power of attorney and the guardian, and they're two different people, the power of attorney has more authority than the guardian, unless the court has intervened and gives more power and authority to a guardian. We encounter many instances of where a resident has a power of attorney who's a family member. And this power of attorney says, no one in the family is allowed to visit my mother or my aunt except me. And if we go meet with a resident and the resident says, I want to see all of my family, well, we make it known that the resident has a right to see anyone they wish to see. Just because someone has power of attorney, they do not have the power to dictate who the resident sees and spends time with. And sometimes that becomes a big issue. But by and large, our role is to educate residents and their families and facility staff about residents' rights and good care practices. We are different than the Department of Health. The Department of Health is another oversight agency, but unlike us, they have the power and authority to cite facilities if they're not up to standards. They can fine facilities. We do not have that type of role. We are all about residents' rights. When there's a complaint that's clearly more of a medical issue, we often suggest to the resident or the concerned person who's called that they contact the Department of Health and ask them to go investigate. We try to ensure that residents have regular and timely access to an ombudsman. We have posters that every facility has been given and should display in their facility of specific residents' rights and how to get in touch with the ombudsman. We are not emergency or first responders, however. And I want to make that clear because some people get that a little confused and they think that we are answering the phone around the clock 24/7. That is not the case. We have anywhere from 3 up to 5 days even to respond to a phone call. And if it's a particularly busy time, we have that leeway to even respond. But in my way of dealing with it, I try to get back to whoever's called the next day or even the same day, because when people call, they're usually distressed, anxious, upset. And I think as soon as we can possibly get back to them, that helps bring their stress level way down. There aren't nearly enough ombudsmen as there need to be. There are 23 of us in the state. And some of us cover multiple counties. I know I go to 54 different facilities, and other ombudsmen have the same kind of workload. Now, by contrast, Ohio, next door, being a larger state with a larger population, I saw recently where the number of ombudsmen they have, including their volunteers, is somewhere around 250. So we need many more ombudsmen than we have in Indiana. So I'm just pointing out a fact. There aren't nearly enough of us, and there are so many problems, and it seems like every month the problems get more complex and more difficult. We provide so-called technical support for the development of resident or family councils. Every facility is required to provide a private space for resident council to meet that is not run by staff, it's run by the residents. And many facilities have family councils. So we sometimes help with that and help explain how the best practices of how they can be run. Like today, part of our role is to provide information to the public about long-term care facilities, services, residents' rights, and so forth. We can represent residents' interests before government agencies, and we can help guide people to other remedies, either legal or other agencies that can help and assist a resident. We do not conduct licensing or regulatory inspections or investigations. We are not the finder of fact, say in an allegation of abuse. That belongs to the Department of Health. We do not provide direct care for residents. When we go into a facility and we're just doing a walkthrough and observing, how clean the facility is, our call lights being answered, if residents have concerns, and they wheel up to us in a wheelchair and say, can you wheel me down to the activities room? We have to say, I'm sorry, sir, or I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't work here. I'm not allowed to do that. So we have a lane that we have to stay in. We are not mandatory reporters either. We do not provide APS services or investigations. And being a former psychotherapist myself, when I learned that the ombudsman is not a mandated reporter to APS, I was kind of shocked. But we don't do that. We can be in touch with APS if they contact us, and oftentimes in certain situations, we will recommend to a facility that they contact APS about an issue, but oftentimes they don't come into facilities. So that was a weird thing for me to hear, that we're not mandatory reporters. Did you want to say something, Megan?
I did. I'm just pondering that.
Okay.
Because I'm surprised with that too.
Mhm.
So, and I know APS doesn't commonly come into the facilities, but let's say you're there checking on a resident and you, though, Budsman, has a strong concern that staff is physically abusing that resident. What would you do in those cases?
Well, the first thing I would do
Hmm.
is ask the resident if the resident's able
Hmm.
to converse. And I just got a message yesterday about someone in a facility who all of a sudden had a black eye.
Oh.
Okay.
Hmm.
So the first thing I would do is go see the resident,
Hmm.
see what the resident has to say, if they're able to say how they got a black eye. And they may not know.
Yeah.
Sometimes people fall and they're allowed to fall.
Hmm.
As weird as that sounds, people fall all the time. I have taken personally two very hard falls at home. People fall.
Yes.
And sometimes families get upset when their loved one falls in a facility, thinking that there's a bubble around them, or should be, and somebody's watching them every minute, every second of every
Hmm.
day, two people in front, two people at their side, so that they don't fall. That's not reality. Um, but I would meet with the resident, and if the resident would seem to indicate that there had been some abuse involved,
Hmm.
um, I would get the resident's permission to do anything, to talk to anyone. You
Okay.
have to get the resident's permission,
Makes
assuming
sense.
they have the cognitive capacity
Hmm.
to grant that permission. If they don't, then we might look to either the POA or if there's a guardian involved. If the resident gives permission to talk to somebody, I might go to the administrator at the facility. I might go to the director of nursing. And if the resident, has the ability to call the Department of Health himself or herself
Hmm.
and file a complaint, then I urge them to do that, because one of our roles as an advocate is to empower the resident to take action on their own behalf.
Okay.
We don't go in and be the decision maker, and we encourage people to whatever extent they can do for themselves to do exactly that.
Hmm.
Do it for yourself. Be your own best advocate. Um, and there have been times when I personally will file a complaint with the Department of Health because anyone can
Oh.
file a complaint. Okay.
Hmm.
And sometimes, and I'll get to care plan meetings in a minute, but sometimes it's a situation where you just have a gut instinct that something's not right here.
Hmm.
And if the resident is not able to file the complaint, or maybe there's a family member who's willing to file the complaint.
True.
Um, but if no one is able to file the complaint, then I can do that.
Okay.
The sad thing is, though, many people, and rightfully so, many people who live in facilities are afraid to speak up for
Hmm.
fear of retaliation.
Yep.
And that fear is very real
Hmm.
because it happens all the time. And I could get on my soapbox and take a little exit ramp here and talk about um, we how horribly we take care of our elderly residents
Yep.
in this country. It's as
Hmm.
if they are the throwaway people.
Yep.
And it's tragic and sad to
It
see
is.
the
Hmm.
conditions in some of these facilities. And it's also just appalling the lack of care and responsibility that some of the staff
Hmm.
demonstrate.
Yep.
They are not in the right profession at times.
Agreed.
So you've seen this.
Yes.
Anybody who's been in a nursing home in the last 10 years has probably seen horrific things. Um, there are, in my opinion, there are no excellent facilities in Indiana. There are some that might be quite good,
Hmm.
some that are okay,
Hmm.
some that should be not operating,
Yep.
again, in my opinion.
Hmm.
But let's face it, long-term care facilities exist now to be a moneymaker for the owners and the management companies. And I know I got off on a tangent there, but I feel really strongly about this. And when I'm no longer an ombudsman, I
Hmm.
might make time to go down to the state legislature and make a pain in the butt out of myself with our legislators about the conditions in nursing homes. But anyway, we do the best we can.
Yep. Okay.
We speak up for residents' rights all the time. We can go to care plan meetings. Every long-term care resident in a nursing home must have, by federal regulation, a care plan meeting every 90 days, or more frequently if there's a noticeable change in the medical condition, or whenever the resident requests one. And if the resident requests the ombudsman to be at the care plan meeting as an advocate, then we can do that. And I go to a lot of those, and some are run very well, others uh, not so much. And I mean, I could tell so many stories, but that's not the purpose of this
Hmm.
talk today. The other thing that we very often get involved with are inappropriate discharges.
Ooh.
When a person is in a facility, whether it's a nursing home or an assisted living facility, and by the way, we only go to licensed facilities. We do not interact with those who are in independent living
Good
situations.
reminder. Yep.
Okay? Only licensed facilities. If a resident has been in a facility for 30 days or more, and the facility wants them out, in other words, a facility initiated discharge, they must file a 30-day notice. And there are only 6 legitimate reasons that a facility can discharge a resident. Of a resident initiated discharge, we don't necessarily get involved in that. And by the way, unless someone's under guardianship or in a memory care unit, people in facilities, they're not in jail. They have the right to leave anytime they want to. However, there could be consequences for that. If someone leaves a facility against medical advice, then that might impact their insurance. If someone gets angry, gets in a huff, and says, I'm out of here, and leaves without a plan, without a place to go, without a safe discharge destination, then that can pose a problem. And when that happens, it doesn't happen often, but it happens occasionally, then the facility, rightfully so, if I'm contacted, I would suggest that they notify Adult Protective Services if they have any kind of an idea as to where this resident is headed. Because sometimes people come into facilities with one of the reasons why they're there is that they've resided in a basically uninhabitable home or apartment that no human being should have to endure the conditions there. And if they're going back to such a place, then APS should be notified, and APS should look into it. Do they always? I have no idea.
Mm.
APS is run very differently now than it used to be.
It is. Yes.
Unfortunately.
Yep.
Unfortunately. So when a resident gets a 30-day notice, they have the right to appeal that and have a hearing with an administrative law judge. And if the resident happens to have an attorney or gets an attorney to get involved in that, fine. But a hearing is basically a telephonic kind of court appearance. And it is the facility, it's the burdens on the facility to demonstrate why a resident would need to leave. And there are very specific criteria and federal guidelines in order for a facility to discharge involuntarily any resident. Now, if it's for non-payment, and this is not an exaggeration, there are people in facilities who are, let's say, they're on Medicaid and they have what is called the patient liability. It's the amount that they have to pay the facility every month to stay there. Now, Medicaid pays the larger percentage of it, but the resident is responsible for the assigned amount, and Medicaid determines that, not the facility, not anybody else. Medicaid determines that. There are some residents who will rack up bills $80,000. They haven't paid a facility in a year and a half. And personally, and most ombudsmen will say this, we will advocate for the resident to see that the facility has met all of the things they have to do in order to discharge someone. But if someone is alert and oriented, has the ability to pay, and simply refuses to pay, well, we're not going to argue that they should be able to stay. Because let's face it, we all have to pay our bills, you know? But then there are other times where, because a resident is so-called difficult, or for whatever reason, the facility thinks, yeah, we're tired of dealing with this resident. They're too demanding, or they're too this, or they're too that. They will, how shall I put this? They will conjure up reasons to get them out. And oftentimes those reasons are completely bogus. And I can tell you that in the time I've been an ombudsman, I would say that 95% of the time, when a resident appeals a discharge notice and the ombudsman is involved as their advocate for the hearing, the resident wins, because the facilities do not follow the proper procedures for issuing a discharge notice, and or we can demonstrate that their alleged reason why this resident has to go is improper and inappropriate. And in our June training this year for all the ombudsmen, we had a former administrative law judge speak to us about various matters. And she said in her entire time as an administrative law judge, the facility never won. So when they try to throw somebody out for trumped up reasons, no pun intended, then the facility is usually going to lose. But anyway, that's a big role. That's a big part of our role, is assisting residents to stay in their homes, because once they enter a facility and they've been there 30 days, the facility can't just say, well, you've got to leave for whatever spurious reason. And when we talk to resident councils, and I've done 2 already this week, I emphasize that whether you're in a nursing home or in assisted living, the room you're in, that is your home. And anytime someone wants to come into your room, if the door isn't open, and even if it is, staff and anybody else needs to knock and get permission to enter. That's their private space. There are a couple of exceptions for when staff can just go in, like if it's a medical emergency, a fire, or a wellness check, or something like that. But by and large, that is their home. And when you think about folks who live in facilities, and I'm particularly talking about nursing homes, not so much ALs, assisted livings. If you're on Medicaid, you're not entitled to a private room. If you're on Medicaid, you aren't entitled to any more square footage than 81 square feet. Now that's a very small space. And if you're in a nursing home for months, if not years, think about everything that you've had to give up. Cherished belongings, personal items. And you're living in this very small space, a double room, with a resident you've never met before. That's a shocking reality change in anyone's life. So living in a nursing home is astoundingly difficult. No one chooses to go to a nursing home. It's really difficult living in there. The other side of that is it's difficult working in a nursing home. Most of them are understaffed. Um, and we hear about that all the time. So the ombudsman role is varied, and we spend a lot of time listening to residents, listening to their family members about the agony they go through, either for themselves or on behalf of their loved one. And we just do the best job that we can in advocating for better care. Uh, the general, to give an example, when you're in a nursing home, the typical schedule is you get 2 showers a week. Now, for someone who's inactive, maybe that's fine. But if you get 2 showers a week and a day comes along and they just don't give you a shower, either they say, well, we don't have time or we don't have enough staff. Or maybe you go a week or 2 weeks without a shower at all. That happens frequently. So when we get calls about that kind of thing, we will suggest, well, let's have a care plan meeting and let's talk about what does this resident need that he or she's not getting. And care plans are person-centered and individualized. And to the degree that they can, every facility must treat a resident as an individual. And that's kind of where we stand in advocating for a resident, that we speak up for them, uh, support them, but again, encourage them to take the lead in getting their own needs met. Um, so being an ombudsman is a tough job, and it's a very rewarding job, though. And sometimes you have to be able to pick out um, what you've done that's made a difference. And it we need many more ombudsmen than we have. Most nursing homes participate in Medicare and Medicaid. As you all no doubt know, Medicare never pays for room and board in a nursing home. They don't pay for somebody to be in a facility. The exception is if they go in for, let's say they've been in a horrific accident and they need lots of physical therapy. They've been in the hospital, they've had surgeries and so on. Then they go to the nursing home for rehab. As you all know, they would have up to 100 days as long as they continue to need skilled care. But if they're on an advantage plan, the rules are different and very strict. Medicaid, as you all know, is the payer of last resort. And I'm working on a case right now where a young man, well, I say young, he's in his mid-50s. He's a double amputee of his legs and he's had 3 strokes. So he's paralyzed on one side. He's been in a facility for 6 years. He needs a new power chair. So the family called and wanted to know what can be done. The facility isn't doing anything about helping him. Well, now the facility appears to be doing something to help him. And, there's just all kinds of situations like that. that occur. Most of the complaints we get are failure to answer call lights, failure to get your brief changed in a timely manner, or I've been sitting in a wet and soiled brief for 32 hours, no one's come to help. Some of the stuff that happens is quite appalling. And people have to be families who have, or residents who have families who come in and visit frequently. They're fortunate, but some of the people in facilities have no one. And when the ombudsman gets involved there, then, you know, our effort to be an advocate gets kicked up a notch or two. Let's see, what else should I mention? As I said, anyone can file a complaint with the Department of Health. And they are beleaguered as well. I think they're short-staffed like everybody is. And they get tons of complaints and they have to triage, you know, prioritize what's most important. They obviously, I think, would respond more quickly to concerns or complaints about abuse or neglect. And those are pretty frequent. Let's see, what should I mention? Well, let me stop here and see if there are any questions, or maybe Megan, you have some on behalf of other folks who might be on or might not be on.
Yeah, there's no questions in the chat box. Well, there's one, but you already answered that one.
Okay.
So if someone needs an ombudsman, how would they find one?
Okay. The best thing to do is to go online and access the Indiana State Ombudsman Program. And ombudsmen are assigned a certain geographic area. For example, I cover all of Hancock and Shelby County, the far east side of Indianapolis, and the southeast quadrant of Marion County. And as I said, there are 23 ombudsmen. So to go online and, you know, look up the Indiana Ombudsman Program, all of us are listed there with the counties that we each serve and our email addresses and a phone number where we can be reached.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Kit, I think it's about time to start wrapping up. Do you have
Okay.
any final thoughts for the audience?
I do.
Okay.
People who live in nursing homes and assisted living who are on Medicaid, they are allotted spending money monthly of a whopping $52.
Yep.
That amount has not changed, from what I understand, for more than 25 years. And if any of you have loved ones, friends in a facility and they're on Medicaid, they get $52 a month for, I don't know, buy a pizza, get their hair done, buy a soft drink. When you think about that, that is absolutely insulting to any adult. And every state has a different amount that they're allotted, and that's decided by the legislature. So any of you who have a concern about that, or if you're like me and you think that's appalling and ridiculous amount, write to your legislator, call your legislator and say, hey, did you know that people who live in nursing homes who are on Medicaid only get $52 a month? Can you do something about that? That would impact so many residents. In my opinion, the bare minimum should be at least 100. Think about inflation over the last 25
Mm-hmm.
years.
Mm-hmm.
That's something very direct that anybody could do, is call or write their legislator about the access of folks to any kind of money. It's a dignity and respect issue as well. So that's something anybody could do.
Yes, it is a shame on that amount. Yeah. Well, Kit, thank you so much for sharing some stories, what ombudsmen do, what they can't do, and how to navigate the program. It's a very, very important resource. I've used it personally for multiple family members. Um, my father himself was one of the resident council presidents. So,
Okay, good,
mm-hmm,
good.
mm-hmm,
Okay.
yes. Uh, they put him in charge of that because he complained all the time. So if he was in this leadership role, it kind of um,
Uh-huh.
changed it a little bit. So yes, yes. But so thank you again for joining us. Before we wrap up, just a reminder that Susan and I will be back Monday, the 24th at 10 a.m. Eastern for our February last Facebook Live presentation on preventative services presented in Spanish. And again, if you have questions for Kit, feel free to chat in the chat box, and Susan and I will get those questions answered for you. Everyone, have a great week.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Take care.
Kit. Mm.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.